Thank you very much, Ambassador Joe, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honour to be here, a great honour to be with you all and so many people I know and people I don't know. I wish you a really successful week. I think it's to rain for the next few days, so that should keep you all busy in here. Hopefully it won't keep raining, but move on again. And I must say I've really enjoyed my last 24 hours in Donegal. I came via Omagh, and it was lovely to play outside of Croke Park, and I look forward to playing Donegal in the final in Donegal. I've an excuse to go back again, so I wish you well against Tyrone next week. Watch their elbows, but anyway, it's Donegal had a good weekend. The women won, the men won. So good luck to you in the next round. I see Kerry have all the luck still. I was watching them goal in the 74th minute. They really are a lucky team. That's how they have 40 All-Ireland finals or whatever they have. And the French ambassador, was really good to hear the French ambassador outline so many positive things. I must say I've always had a great relations with our French colleagues, and I have to say, tongue-in-cheek, I'm delighted to see that tax harmonisation is still on the agenda. It was there 26 years ago when I was Minister of Finance as well. And as Pat Cox and myself know, we'll probably stay there for another few years as well. But anyway, listen, we've been dealing with the border for 98 years, so don't feel upset. Joe, thanks very much, and it is a pleasure, real pleasure to be here to give the 18th annual John Hume Lecture to the MacGill Summer School, and your 38th year of the summer school, and I congratulate you on all the efforts and work that you've put in over so many years and decades through thick and through thin to make this work. We're here to talk on the future for Ireland within an evolving new European political landscape and the challenge and the challenges that this poses for us. I want to say a few words about John. I want to say a few words about the Brexit negotiations and just the process and some issues that I think perhaps don't get the focus that we get every day. And then I want to just end on the present negotiations and just where they were at when I stood up. But you never know where they are by the time I sit down. But anyway, that's not my fault. John Hume himself, I think, is a great supporter all his life of the European Union. He served as a member of the European Parliament for 25 years between the years of 1979 and 2004. And he saw at first hand how the European Union had helped to bring peace and reconciliation to the continent of Europe. John sought to replicate and transcend many experiences that took place at European level and to implement such innovative policies and structures to support the peace process on the island of Ireland. For example, membership of the different committees within the European Parliament are allocated under the Hunt system, and this was one of the systems that was used to distribute and allocate jobs within the Northern Ireland Assembly itself, which John brought to our attention. This year, of course, we've marked the 20th anniversary of the ratification by the Irish people, north and south, of the agreement of the 22nd of May 1998, which was the first concurrent act of self-determination by the people of the island as a whole since 1918. And the yes vote in the referenda of more than 85% of the total poll in the whole island of Ireland was a rare expression of near unanimity by the people on this island, and a clear signal that they were not prepared to countenance any false remnant of democratic self-justification for further acts of paramilitary violence from any quarter. And the idea for concurrent referendums, north and south, and to build democratic consensus around the Good Friday Agreement belonged to John Hume, who in my view is the real hero of the peace process. John was always an astute politician with a huge intellectual depth and someone deeply read in Irish history. He saw the dangers of militant Irish nationalism being irreversibly wedded to a distorted mandate allegedly given in the 1918 general election. He wanted to empower a new generation to write and shape their vision in history. And for John Hume, this had to be underpinned by a fair and an honourable accommodation between Unionists and Nationalists based on partnership and cooperation and mutual respect in relationships within Northern Ireland, between North and South, and between Ireland and Britain. John Hume, like all of us who engage in the Good Friday Agreement talks, had come to understand that this does not mean an end to difference. It did not spell defeat for either of the two great traditions of nationalism or unionism. Instead, it spelled victory for the people who wanted to coexist in peace and harmony on this island. And for the peaceful vision he advocated, even through the darkest days of murder and mayhem in Northern Ireland, and for the tireless service to the Irish people, North and South, nationalists and unionists, I want to reaffirm my view that John Hume is a true Irish hero. John Hume's name will stand tall in our history alongside giants like Parnell and David and O'Connell. Successive Taoiseach recognised John as a voice of sane and sensible constitutional nationalism. His high example of magnificent public service should be an inspiration to all of us as we look to the future and try to hold peace and try to deal with the challenges of Brexit and the damage done by a foolish decision to exit the European Union. In every single step of the way on the journey to peace, John Hume has been an inspirational figure who for 30 years served the SDLP, his constituents in Fáil, and people everywhere on this island who aspired for peace through tireless labour and the unquenching desire to foster reconciliation. At times when violence and hatred was in the ascendancy and it looked like a political solution would never be reached, John Hume stood steadfast for peace. He had courage, he had commitment, and he never gave up. As the conflict raged in Northern Ireland, through sheer willpower, the name of John Hume became synonymous around the world with refusal to yield to those forces of hatred, of death, of darkness and destruction. He was a philosopher, architect, and ultimately symbol of peace. And John Hume never once faltered in his insistence that dialogue was the only way forward. He served tired in his efforts to persuade others to come around the table. He never failed in his belief that a peaceful solution could be found to the problems of this island. And for that, and for future generations, we can be extremely grateful. The commitment of John Hume to the establishment and the achievement of a lasting peace was fully recognised in the awarded Nobel Peace Prize, which he was proud to share with David Trimble. In our history, John Hume is a towering figure, a giant of peace, and I hope that young people in particular from both traditions in Northern Ireland will be inspired by John Hume's vision, his work for equality, his dedication and enduring belief that with effort and commitment, the people of this island can be united in peace, in partnership and equality. Northern Ireland and this island faces challenges. Brexit is one of them. But those challenges are dwarfed by the ones that we have overcome. John Hume's dedicated his political career to stopping conflict, to sowing the seeds of peace. It is a notable legacy, and I am proud to have worked with him for so many years, and prouder still to say that this great man was my friend. I wish John and Pat, in very trying circumstances, well for the future. Personally, I find it hard to fathom or conceptualise that Northern Ireland will not have any members of the European Union in a little over 8 months' time. But I accept that we have to deal with the reality of the situation that we are facing. I think the Ambassador has given us a good outlines of some of the challenges and some of the things that we have to face. But I think that it is important to reiterate that the European Union has played and continues to play a very important role in supporting the peace process on the island of Ireland. The European Union has allocated €150 million towards the costs of Peace 4 programme that runs for the financial period from 2014 to the year after next. The Peace 4 initiative supports and produces many important economic and social projects which are well known in this part of the country. The promotion of urban and rural regeneration, developing cross-border cooperation, financing social inclusion measures, designing new ways for local communities to work together in the spirit of partnership. And the European Union has always been to the forefront in applying the peace process on the island of Ireland. The European Union has a very early supporter of the International Funds of Ireland programme when it was set up 32 years ago. And the European Union has always financially backed different EU peace programmes and have put in place since the mid-1990s. They've all been very important and very constructive. And the Union is itself a peace process. European Economic Community, founded in 1957, with the clear objective of helping to build peace and reconciliation within Europe. I would strongly urge the European Union to continue to support future peace programmes in Ireland post the British departure from the European Union. The European Union has a very strong record in supporting social and economic programmes in countries neighbouring the European Union. In fact, there is no reason why the European Union cannot continue to support the peace process in Ireland within the changing new political architecture of the European Union. And the peace process is being supported in a very concrete sense by countries around the globe, outside the European Union, United States of America, Canada, Australia and New Zealand in different ways help out. EU financial support, of course, has and continues to play an important role in developing the economy of Northern Ireland. Many government agencies, public bodies, private sector companies, the farming community continue to receive EU funding. Key EU instruments and support the economy in Northern Ireland, the Common Agricultural Policy, the Regional Development Fund, the Social Fund, the Maritime and Fisheries Fund, European Technical Cross-Border Cooperation Programme, and the list goes on and on. All of them, in their own way, doing a good job, collectively doing an enormous job. And we should recall for a moment that the EU budgetary process works in a multi-annual manner. A present financial perspective that supports these programmes and indeed across other member states runs up to 2020. Under the Common Agricultural Policy, farmers in Northern Ireland will receive in excess of €2.6 billion in direct payments over those years. This accounts for 87% of total farms' incomes in Northern Ireland. A further €227 million is being allocated under the EU Rural Development Programme. And these monies are being used to make agricultural sectors more competitive, support the environmental best practices, develop more entrepreneurship and create employment, most of all. And the agriculture and food sector are vitally important components of the economy of Northern Ireland. And these sectors will need to be heavily supported in financial terms post the British departure from the European Union. The agri-sector food accounts for a quarter of all manufacturing goods in Northern Ireland alone and is creating many high-quality jobs. So by continuing to support the creation of new innovations of agri-sector in Northern Ireland, it can and develop new products and services and will remain a vital cog in the wheel of the economy in Northern Ireland and contribute to combating the global challenge of local security. I could equally say a lot about the Regional Development Fund, the European Social Fund, the Interreg programme, but I think you're aware of those programmes. And in my published speech, I just outlined some of those advantages, but I'm not going to go into them here. It is very important, I think, also just to mention, as I see many young people here, that researchers, universities and innovators and private and public bodies continue to secure financial support for participating within European Union research, innovation and science initiatives. And supporting research and innovation is helping to build a knowledge economy in Northern Ireland, is supporting the creation of high quality jobs, and it's equally helping to contribute to devising new solutions to tackle social disadvantage and combating chronic health diseases, developing sustainable food production and bringing cleaner, renewable, more efficient energy practices to the marketplace. All things that I think the chairman at the start outlined are part of what the topic of this week is about. The debate, ladies and gentlemen, that has taken place about the issue of ensuring that there is a frictionless border on the island of Ireland post-Brexit has taken away, in my view, from the debate about the replacement of the future financing of requirements of existing EU-funded programmes that operate in Northern Ireland. In other words, how much money will the British government allocate post-2020 to substitute EU financing programmes that operate in Northern Ireland at this time? It's a very serious issue indeed, and all contracting parties need to sit down and assess how to move these matters forward in a positive and a constructive way. And I think not to go into it tonight, but the reason the institutions of the Good Friday Agreement are not working in Northern Ireland today is, in my view, and I keep in touch with all the parties and all the key players week in, week out still, and the governments, is because of Brexit and this debate. And this fundamental question, I'm not saying the border isn't important, I'm saying this question is hugely important, because the negotiations, as the Ambassador knows, starts next year, starts actually after the summer, of how much the British government will pay. They do say in the white paper that they're in favour of contributing to the peace fund, but they say almost zilch on all of the other issues. So we leave that for there. On the UK-EU Brexit discussions, the time frame, as you all know, you listen to day in, day out, to reach a Brexit deal is very tight. EU governments want these discussions concluded by October next. This is because the European Commission, the European Parliament, the EU governments have to ratify the Brexit deal on the working hypothesis that there will be a deal. But it's just simply not clear that this is going to be the case. And of course, any such withdrawal agreement has to be approved by the British Houses of Parliament as well. And that's a tall order at the moment. The British government has now published its white paper on exiting the European Union. I think it is incumbent on EU governments to carefully analyse what is included within this 98 pages or so. In other words, EU governments should not rush, in my view, to an immediate judgment with regard to what has been proposed in the white paper. I, of course, very much welcome the fact that there's a clear commitment in the white paper to maintain a frictionless border on the island of Ireland. This fleshes out the commitment given by the British government to the government here in December last, and in March this year, again, it was reiterated. It is a very important and sensitive matter, as you all know, but also honours political understanding commitments that are part of the Good Friday Peace Agreement of 1998. And the Withdrawal Act, passed in Westminster last month, also binds the UK government to this commitment of a frictionless border post-Brexit. In reality, this must mean that there will not be any checks on products crossing the Irish border to see if they are compliant with EU regulations and standards, such as those that govern, for example, agriculture. Trading rules in the field of food safety is another matter. Now, I welcome, and I very much like to say this when you're here, Ambassador, the strong support from EU leaders, the President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, the President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, President of the European Parliament, Antonio Tajani, and former EU Brexiteer negotiation, and your colleague, Michel Barnier, who I know very well. I think he knows Ireland, he understands the border from his days in the regional fund. He's been hugely helpful over the last few years, and I think we're very grateful for his many visits here and the huge amount of time that he's given to Irish groups that have gone to see him, and that when he's met here in Dublin. I think we know from the parliamentary arithmetic at Westminster, it bobs and weaves when it comes to Brexit issues. So the solidarity that has been shown at the EU level on these specific issues of ensuring that a frictionless border is in reality after Brexit is both important and hugely significant. That said, I think it is important to emphasise that the European Union derives its legitimacy and powers through a variety of different treaties. New EU regulations and directives are enacted via different legal provisions that are included within these treaties. And any issues concerning the compliance or otherwise of EU laws and directives are interpreted by the European Court of Justice. And there's a whole myriad of EU case law that culminates in 60 years of these judgments. A lot of EU case law relates to interpreting how the internal market should operate within the European Union. A lot of EU case law relates to interpreting how the European Union can engage with third countries in the field of trade. And the internet and the internal market ensures that there is a system promoting the free movement of goods, persons, services and capital across the length and breadth of the European Union. And the integrity of the internal market is not premised on countries seeking to participate in some elements of the internal market and not in others. It's just not written in the law. And I'm not even sure that the European Commission and the European Court of Justice will recognise the right for the UK to strike trade deals with third countries if the UK itself secures a standalone trade deal to access the marketplace of the European Union. I've been involved in negotiating many agreements over the years and involved in many European agreements. And I know it's difficult. I fully appreciate the contracting parties must show a degree of flexibility and mutual respect with such negotiations and with such process. However, EU negotiators can only demonstrate a flexibility based on the legal constraints that are operating, and this is in accordance with the legal provisions of different EU treaties. In other words, EU negotiators have to work within some clear general parameters as set out under existing EU treaties. They cannot go outside this negotiating remit. And at times you read and you hear from politicians across the water, the European countries and Michel Barnier and others should just be more flexible. But they work under very stated legal constraints. And that's in everybody's interest that they do that. And, you know, there was nobody more strong than ensuring that for the last 40 years or so than British governments. So I'm afraid when it comes to their turn, they have to take their medicine as well and remember that the whole system is built on EU treaties, which they were very happy to ensure and fought to ensure were followed out over the years. And the reason that they cannot go outside this negotiating mandate is because there's absolutely no appetite at all in Europe to amend existing treaties. And this would require a very detailed and complicated ratification process, including the holding of a referendum in Ireland and most likely in other EU countries. And could you imagine having that referendum in this country at the moment when the border question and other issues would get caught up in them? In other words, any prospective final EU-UK deal must take place within the existing legal framework of the European Union. The EU budgetary financial perspective, as I said, operates up until 2020. So depending on how political issues evolve both in London and in Brussels with the negotiators over the next few months, some other possible outcome scenarios that could play out include the following, and I give four. Article 50 could yet be invoked by the British government to continue Brexit negotiations post-March 2019. The second one, in March 2019, the UK enters the traditional period that expires in December 2020 with the objective of trying to conclude a free trade agreement. This is equivalent to a hard Brexit. Thirdly, the UK enters the traditional period with an agreement to form a customs union and are seeking to access part of the EU single market. This is equivalent to a soft Brexit. Or the last one, in a no-deal situation, there will be an emergency exit. Yes, if Britain is not in the EU customs union, it is free to negotiate trade deals with third countries around the world. The point made continually by Boris before he ran away. And 13% of British trade is with 50 countries, and which the EU has preferential free trade agreements with. But the 50-plus trade deals that the European Union itself has with third countries include 32 of those deals that are with Commonwealth countries. And Britain will have to renegotiate trade deals when they leave with Norway, with Switzerland, with South Korea, with Turkey, with Japan, and with Canada, and so many more. And I think it is worth noting that in 2015, the EU accounted for 44% of British exports. If Britain were to lose 5% of this level of trade with the European Union, it would have to increase its level of trade with Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa by 25%. I wish them well. Just to make up for the shortfall in trade with the European Union marketplace. I could give you many figures, but I think that one alone shows the insanity of their position. It can take time to strike trade deals. It took 10 years for Australia to complete a trade deal with China. It took India 6 to complete a trade deal with the ASEAN countries, with the Japanese one that more or less is finished, but has been going on for donkey's years. The burning question really is, how will the British government secure better trade deal agreements with third countries than the existing trade deals that these countries here have with the European Union itself? Post-Brexit, the population of the European Union will still be over 440 million people. British population standing at 65 plus million people. 54% of all direct inward investment that comes into Britain comes from the European Union. I do not think, and I've negotiated a fair few things in my day, Joe, but to see how countries will give a better deal to British ministers, whoever they are, at the time if they leave Brexit, than the European Union has already with these countries. It doesn't make logic. Could you imagine if you were selling your car that's outside, if one person offered you 20,000 for the car and the other person offered you 50,000? I mean, who are you going to sell the car to? But Boris is a clever man, as we all know. One side effect of Brexit is that the people in the Republic of Ireland are becoming more supportive of Irish membership of the European Union itself. The Eurobarometer poll that was carried out by the European Commission found that Irish people are the most optimistic in Europe about the future of the European Union. 77% of people living in the Republic of Ireland have a positive disposition towards the European Union. You average across 28 member states holding a positive viewpoint is 58%. And we hold the same view about the single market. Brexit has, ladies and gentlemen, consumed an enormous amount of political capital across the length and breadth of the European Union since the UK Brexit referendum 2 years ago. Many political issues that should have been to the forefront in a political context in Europe have had to take a back seat, which European Union governments have sought to grapple with the political fallout from Brexit. The ambassador has given a good list, so no need for me to do it. But Britain leaves the European Union next March, 29th of March. Then the next set of elections for the European Parliament will take place shortly afterwards. Self-evidently, there will be no European elections taking place in Britain. But this is quite a loss to the whole political system, and I suppose more to the socialist MEPs than anyone else, because they have over 20 in England. So President Macron is weighing up the options as to whether to form a new centralist political group within the European Union, outside the operations of the Christian Democrat, Socialist, Liberal and political groups, which will make an interesting position. It also remains to be seen if EU leaders will accept the procedure that was used in 2014 that elected Jean-Claude Juncker as President of Parliament. But in any way, we'll wait to see how these things fall out. In any event, EU governments need to a greater extent to refocus on key economic challenges: safeguarding balanced trade relations with the United States and with China, tackling long-term unemployment and poverty, supporting the information communication technologies revolution, dealing with research and innovation in science sectors so as to create high-value jobs, and develop a progressive neighbourhood policy with countries located outside or near the European Union. The macroeconomic debate about Brexit cannot take away from the fact that implications from Brexit are affecting the quality of life and the economic livelihoods of people across the length and breadth. So, in conclusion, and obviously wishing the contracting parties every success in the next month with Brexit negotiations, and sometimes I wake up saying, God, it'd be nice to be involved in those negotiations, but I normally go into bed, say, thanks be to Christ, I'm not. But anyway, because I always dealt with reasonable people like David Trimble and Ian Paisley, and Jeffrey Donaldson and Billy Hutchinson and all decent guys. Anyway, the Brexiteers, as you know, are not that way. They're some of the most successful pressure groups in British history, arguably the second most successful after the anti-Corn Law Leaguers. They persuaded David Cameron to hold a referendum on Britain's membership of the European Union, which he was nuts to do. They won it against the ranks of the British and global establishment, and they persuaded Theresa May to pursue the hardest possible Brexit at the start. Despite the narrow victory, I think we have to, in looking back and looking forward, Joe, I have to say, she made the decision to go to that Tory conference in October 18 and take the hardline view. She went to Lancaster House and mentioned the customs union that hadn't been mentioned at all in the debate. She brought that to fore. She continued on the hardline for a long time. But it would be a mistake to underestimate a group of people who turned a crackpot fantasy into a near a defining vote. Brexiteers command 60 people in the House of Commons, and they are prepared to do anything. Theresa May, I'm afraid, kicked the can down the road for a long time, and that allowed them to group up and to build themselves up. And I suppose until recently, when the 5 biggest business lobby groups joined forces in the UK, and particularly in England, to show that they were sick of no progress in the Brussels talks. And you had Airbus and many of the car BMW and Honda all saying that they want to see decisions and they want to see actions. Then we saw that. For us, it's, I think, becoming plain that hard Brexiteers in the cabinet were losing the fight. That's why a few of them resigned. In fact, quite a lot of them have resigned. There's not only the 2, but there's a lot of other senior people. But the logic of the backstop that Mrs May has accepted to avert the hard border in Ireland is that Britain will stay in a customs union and in regulatory alignment with the European Union even after the transitional period that is meant to end in September 2020. Now, Brussels know this very well, and I think on the summit a few weeks ago, 29th of June, they've been critical of Mrs May's delay in setting out what she wants from Brexit, but their willingness was to give her more time because they believed that she was softening her position. And I think we saw that she did that a bit. But we have seen chaotic scenes in the House of Commons in recent times. First of all, we had a Tory MP who led a battle a few weeks back to try and force Dominic Grieve to give Parliament the right to decide what happens if the Commons rejects the eventual Brexit deal. David Davis, at the time Brexit Secretary, huffed about an unconstitutional bid to stop the government's treaty-making role. And then we had a British Remainer minister resigning to fight Brexit from the outside. And when the British Prime Minister realised that she was going to lose those votes by the campaign of the Remainers, she changed track and she pushed on to make some good progress. And then she went ahead and she brought out the White Paper. Now, the White Paper, as you know, White Papers originated from, it's a British term, we have them too, originated back in 1922. Probably the famous one was the Churchill White Paper in 1922. And White Papers are a tool of participatory democracy. They're not unalterable policy documents. White Papers have tried to perform the dual role of presenting firm government policies while at the same time inviting options upon them. But normally what happens in White Papers for the last 90 years or so is that you put out the White Paper and you debate it. What happened in Britain was that you put out the white paper and then a few days later you have the vote. And incredibly, what the white paper said one thing, and then they went in and had a vote, and the vote said another thing. And I don't really get it, other than if the order of the day is to win the vote, it doesn't matter what you agree on. If it's a Monday, you stay in power, you vote the Monday policies. If it's Tuesday, you vote the other way. And that's, I'm afraid, what has happened. Having marched up the path of a hard Brexit hill and surveying the vista, the Prime Minister has backed down before the white paper. She lost a few soldiers along the way, as somebody has said. And then she moved towards a soft Brexit. And the white paper is not a bad white paper. I mean, I've read it. It is simply, if I was to put 98 pages into a few lines for you, it's a negotiating position, as Ambassador has said, and I agree with that. It's good that they have a negotiating position for a post-Brexit partnership with the European Union. It wants what they call an association agreement with the European Union of unprecedented breadth and depth, with access tailored to UK interests. In economic terms, it permits so much continuity that one EU diplomat, not the ambassador, said it looked more like a membership application than an exit. And cross-border trade in goods and agricultural products would continue unimpeded, with Britain largely applying the EU rule books. Now, I have to say that if Theresa May got the white paper the day she published it through, it would suit the Irish government, because it deals with the border situation and it also would deal with the East-West trade position. So the bit on Ireland would suit us. The trouble is that doesn't suit the European Union, and that's a difficulty, and our negotiating position is pinned to the European Union, and rightly so. So there is a difficulty, a major difficulty for that. And I think, as the ambassador said, as late as Friday, a number of people said you just cannot do that. Difficulty on the other side, I don't see the DUP in their position changing the position from where they are, that they will accept a Northern Ireland, English, Scotland, Wales agreement, but not a Northern Ireland alone agreement, which is what the EU has said, and I understand the arguments. But I'm not arguing one way or the other. I'm just saying this is the difficulty for it. The Chequers deal, I think, has pivoted the UK towards a softer Brexit. There's no doubt about that, but it has proved to be a step too far for our own government, and having lost 2 people already, I don't see how they can get the agreement through the Parliament. But just to bring it near the end and up to date, 2 weeks ago we had the white paper. No, it's not even 2 weeks, it's only 10 days since we had the white paper. And then last Monday you have the vote. Now, the customs bill was narrowly passed by the UK Parliament, but a number of amendments tabled by Brexiteers have undermined the Chequers position and the Northern Ireland backstop agreed with the EU in December. The amendments look to have the hands of the UK government and increased likelihood of a hard Brexit. You cannot take the white paper, amend it in Parliament, and then say the white paper stands alone. Now, it is what they're saying, but it defies logic. If you have a white paper that hasn't been passed in Parliament, and you have a customs bill where the white paper says one thing, and you pass amendments that say the opposite, that have been passed and are now legal, I'm afraid it's poor politics, and I'm conscious that I shouldn't say anything stronger than that. And I think my reading of it is the same as a reading as both sides, both Brexiteers and Remainers. So I'm not giving you my personal view alone on this. The UK government's Brexit position looks to have been undermined by these amendments, and I think that's the reality of it. I think the idea of a soft Brexit for goods and a harder one for services is probably, I agree with that in the white paper, because services is 80% of the UK economy, financial and related professional services being the main ones. So the Treasury wanted a different agreement and even go into the details of that, but I think what they've said is probably doable by the European Union. So I'm afraid, folks, a lot of water is going to go under the bridge. I don't see this becoming a crisis on the 31st of October. I would be amazed if when we get to Halloween this is finished. I think the can will be kicked down the road again. It might even be kicked into a British general election. I think increasingly debate, John Major was at it today, but I think increasingly the debate is going to move away from a soft Brexit versus a hard Brexit to an argument of no Brexit versus an election or another referendum, and I don't see that. I think an election is more likely. So I'd love to tell you that it'll all be solved out and everyone will live happily ever after. I wish Theresa May every success. I think David Cameron, if he was a friend of hers, he wasn't a very good one, but that's how the cookie crumbles. And there were times I used to love to see the British government in trouble, not particularly at the moment, because it gets us into a fair bit of position. And I wish the government every success. I have been supportive of the efforts of the government in this. And I suppose my biggest concern that I would love to see the institutions up in Northern Ireland, but I'm afraid we won't be able to do that until we see the other side of this debacle. But it's it's amazing how in Ireland, when we have referendums go wrong, what we do is we change the rules and we have it again. And but they slagged us so much in Britain for doing that that they're probably unlikely to do that. So all we can do is continue to help them. And as good Irish people, we're always there to help and support the British in their hour of need. And we'll continue to do that. And if they want our advice or our help, do so. But make sure you don't do anything to damage us. Thank you very much.